Welcome to today's media question and answer session on the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. My name is David Rodier, and I will serve as your moderator. Bienvenue aux questions et réponses des médias d'aujourd'hui sur le rapport final de l'enquête nationale sur les femmes et les filles autochtones disparues et assassinées. Je m'appelle David Rodier, je suis votre modérateur. Before I introduce the commissioners, a few housekeeping items. We will begin with brief remarks from each of the commissioners, and then we will open up the floor to questions. We have microphones set up on each side of the room and ask those wishing to address a question to line up at the microphone closest to you. You will have the opportunity to ask one question and one follow-up if needed. Before your question, please state your name and media outlet. As we have limited time, we ask that you refrain from repeating questions that have already been answered. Finally, the commissioners are joined by a number of technical experts and, who may be called upon to elaborate on an answer if needed. Avant de présenter les commissaires, quelques questions d'ordre administratif. Nous commencerons avec de brèves remarques de la part de chacun des commissaires. Ensuite, nous passerons aux questions. Nous avons des micros installés à chaque côté de la salle et demandons à ceux qui souhaitent poser une question de bien vouloir s'approcher au micro le plus près de vous. Vous aurez l'occasion de poser une question et d'ajouter un complément à votre question si nécessaire. Avant de poser votre question, veuillez indiquer votre nom et votre organisation. Étant donné que notre temps est limité, nous vous demandons de ne pas répéter des questions qui auraient été préalablement répondues. Enfin, les commissaires sont assistés par un certain nombre d'experts techniques et spécialisés qui peuvent être amenés à compléter une réponse si nécessaire. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our panel. Je vais maintenant présenter les invités d'aujourd'hui. I'll ask you to, our distinguished guests, to sit. We have left to right, Chief Commissioner, Commissaire en Chef Marianne Buller, Commissioner Commissaire Brian Eolfson, Commissioner Commissaire Kaya Robinson, and finally Commissioner Commissaire Michel Odette. And now over to you, Chief Commissioner Buller, et maintenant à vous, Commissaire en Chef Buller.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. As I said earlier, it is a real honor for me to serve as Chief Commissioner for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Truly a historic inquiry. I have to tell you personally, this has been a very challenging and very moving experience for me to be Chief Commissioner. But it isn't about me. It's about the families and survivors who shared their truths, who are at the heart of our final report. I thank them, all of them, for their courage, their tears, and their honesty. We heard from more than 2,380 family members, survivors of violence, experts, and knowledge keepers from coast to coast to coast. Our research team scrutinized a wealth of existing research and did even more research. From all of this work, we have learned that the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, 2S, LGBTQIA people, has been generations in the making. The Canadian state has and continues to enact laws and enforce policies that perpetuate the violation of human and Indigenous rights. This is colonization. This is discrimination. This is genocide. There needs to be a transformational change in how we build and maintain relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. These relationships must honor Indigenous and human rights. This transformational change is needed to ensure the safety and security of Indigenous women and girls, 2S LGBTQIA people. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. The first thing I want to say is that I have tremendous gratitude for all the family members and survivors of violence who came forward to share their truths with all of us through the National Inquiry's processes. To witness their extraordinary strength and courage has been an incredible experience. And it's their voices that have carried this work forward, and it's been an honor and a privilege to be a part of this opportunity for change. The record created by all of those who contributed to the work of the National Inquiry gives strength and support for concrete and effective action that can be taken to remove systemic causes of violence and to increase the safety of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people in Canada. We've clearly found that many Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people in Canada are denied basic rights that many people take for granted, such as access to safe housing and education. The fundamental human rights and Indigenous rights of Indigenous women and trans and two-spirit people in Canada must be upheld and respected on a substantive and equitable basis. And based on our findings, we made a number of calls for justice in the area of human security. For example, we've called on all governments to immediately ensure that Indigenous people have access to safe housing, clean drinking water, and adequate food. We're calling for safe and affordable transit and transportation services and infrastructure for Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people living in remote or rural communities. And we call on all governments to work to provide supports and resources for education, training, and employment opportunities for all Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people. Everyone in Canada has a duty and a responsibility to take action to address the issue of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and trans and two-spirit people. It's also important that men take action and stand up to end violence towards women and children, and that we listen to Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people in addressing the issue of violence, as they are the true experts and have the knowledge as to what is needed in their communities to stop the violence. We have the opportunity to make the necessary changes to ensure the safety of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people for generations to come. Timagwich.
Good morning. I too would like to express my gratitude and how humbling this experience has been, and express my gratitude to all those that shared with the inquiry their truths, their expertise. I want to talk a little bit about our calls for justice as it relates to health and culture, particularly culture, which may be interpreted as being artistic expression, song and dance. But we need to understand that it's so much more. Culture is what binds people together. Culture is what defines my relationship between my family members, my fellow citizens. The denial of culture and identity has had a devastating impact on Indigenous women, girls, gender diverse peoples, and Indigenous communities as a whole. You only need to think of an example of a woman who, because she married a non-Indigenous man, loses her status. She loses her identity. Who is she now? By losing her identity, she loses her place in a community. Her children lose her as the transmitter of knowledge for the next generations to come. she loses her house. She loses her health benefits. She loses her identity and her humanity. And that loss of identity is created by Canadian law and enforced by Canadian officials. That is an example of what the loss of identity does. We talk about health and wellness. This is not about a yoga retreat. This is about fundamental human rights to health and how that has been denied generation after generation. We've heard recently the apology about the TB treatment of Inuit during the 30s and 40s and the devastating impact that had. Well, there's numerous historic events, human rights violations, Indigenous rights violations that have had a devastating impact on the health and wellness, physical, spiritual, and mental, of Indigenous women and girls. This continues today. In the vast majority of the Canadian Arctic, a woman giving birth has to leave her community, leave her spouse, leave her other children, leave her job, her economic security to give birth in a community that is not hers. What is a celebration turns into a sentence. This happened, I suspect, today. So the rights to health and the rights to culture and wellness must be upheld. This is not merely a question of law enforcement or a justice system response to end the violence, to end the genocide. The rights of Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse people to their culture, to their identity, to their place within their communities and families must be restored, and their health and wellness and dignity returned to them. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Kaya, Brian et Marianne, qui, avec toutes ces semaines, mois et années, mais pas longs dans l'histoire du monde, êtes devenus de grands mentors et des amis et une nouvelle famille. Les gouvernements, le gouvernement du Canada, nous ont ordonné, par le biais des termes et références, un exercice qui n'a jamais existé auparavant. Un exercice qui nous a demandé de trouver les causes systémiques et de démontrer quelles sont toutes, mais je dis bien toutes, les formes de violence auxquelles les femmes et les filles autochtones vivent ici au Canada. Pour trouver ces causes, pour trouver la racine, afin de donner le meilleur traitement, la meilleure approche, nous avons retourné dans l'histoire. Et l'histoire est importante. Il ne faut pas nier cette histoire-là. Je suis fière de dire, peu importe les rides ou la fatigue, l'énergie et l'adrénaline, mais en toute sincérité, fière de dire que nous l'avons fait, l'exercice. Un exercice complexe, politisé, émotionnel, tragique. Des gens en ont fait du capital politique sur le dos des femmes, sur le dos des filles. Ça démontre une autre cause systémique. Je vous dirai brièvement les mots pour lesquels sont extrêmement importants pour moi comme femme Inuit et québécoise, mais aussi comme commissaire. Hein? Je vais assumer mes mocassins de commissaire jusqu'à minuit le 30 juin. Aujourd'hui, oui, c'est le dépôt d'un rapport important, historique. Il reste beaucoup de choses à faire. Pour terminer, je demande à ceux et celles qui se rappellent que les milliers de pages qu'on retrouve, les milliers de mots et de solutions et de messages d'espoir et de résilience, il est important de reconnaître ce qui s'est passé ici, avant qu'on appelle ça le Canada, et maintenant le Canada, que nos institutions, nos gouvernements, nos organisations, les mouvements, l'imputabilité est fondamentale, la reddition de comptes va de pair, et afin d'honorer cette vérité-là, vous en faites partie. J'en fais partie. Et les mots qui sont importants pour des femmes qui n'ont pas eu les réponses ou le soutien nécessaire, la sécurité et la sûreté doivent de pair aussi. Merci.
Merci. Thank you, Commissaire Odette. I will now open up the floor to questions. Je vais maintenant ouvrir la séance de questions. On va commencer avec Madeleine.
Oui, Madeleine Blais-Morin, Radio-Canada. Je vais poser ma question en français, messieurs, madame les commissaires. Madame Odette, comment vous expliquez assez facilement comment vous arrivez à la conclusion de génocide et génocide encore aujourd'hui?
Facilement, premièrement, parce qu'on le vit, nos 5 sens sont éveillés. Et si ma mère va marier le plus beau Québécois, comme des milliers de femmes, va être expulsée d'une communauté. Et va arriver bien d'autres choses qui est bien expliqué dans le rapport. Donc, des milliers de femmes, dont j'en fais partie, est directement affectée par les politiques et la violence coloniale. Et le fait qu'aujourd'hui, lorsqu'on demande justice jusqu'à l'international, le droit international démontre qu'en effet, encore une fois, le Canada ne protège pas les femmes autochtones et les filles autochtones.
Madame Odette, le premier ministre, dans son discours, n'a pas utilisé le terme génocide. On entendait il y a un instant l'ancien ministre de la Justice, Erwin Cutler, dire que lui n'utiliserait pas ce terme-là. Donc, craignez-vous que le débat sur le concept de génocide occulte le reste de votre rapport?
J'aime beaucoup votre question, si vous me permettez. Souvenons-nous qui a développé la définition du génocide. Est-ce qu'il y avait des Autochtones? Est-ce que les peuples autochtones étaient présents au moment de la réflexion et l'adoption de la définition du génocide à l'ONU? Non. Alors, encore une fois, nous allons nous buter, malgré que tous les articles de cette définition-là nous affectent au quotidien. Ce sont encore ces gens qui, avec leur système, vont faire en sorte qu'on va mesurer des choses avec lesquelles ne vont pas considérer. Alors, pour être plus précis, je vous dirais que oui, un débat doit se faire, mais pas juste un débat intellectuel, mais un tribunal. C'est décrit dans notre document.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Kevin Gallagher with CTV News. My question is very similar to my colleagues that just happened in English, though. Why was the terminology of calling this a genocide decided upon by the Commissioners in the report?
Based on the evidence that we heard, we read, it was an inescapable conclusion.
Were you disappointed when there seemed to be urging from the crowd to have the Prime Minister say that this was a genocide? It didn't seem that was in his speech at all today.
I can't speak for the Prime Minister or for other people, but what I can say is that the Prime Minister mentioned that they're going to read the report very carefully and review their next steps and start working on the national action plan that we have in our calls to action. I suppose it's a better question to ask of the Prime Minister.
Raymond Filion de TVA. Êtes-vous déçu, Madame Audet, que M. Trudeau n'ait pas utilisé justement le mot génocide?
Le moment où M. Trudeau partageait son message et ses réactions, je suis sincère, oui. Pourquoi? Parce que les familles qui ont été déportées de force sont venues témoigner devant nous de façon publique. Et dans ce même témoignage, 3 générations vont vivre la violence coloniale. Donc, on parle d'une déportation forcée. Et en plus, on va ajouter des politiques pour les appauvrir et amener, attaquer la sécurité alimentaire. En même temps, on va enlever ces enfants de force d'un groupe pour les amener à un autre endroit, qui sont les écoles résidentielles, les pensionnats indiens. Et dans cette même communauté-là, une personne représentant de l'État va abuser de génération en génération les filles et les garçons, qui sont devenus par la suite des adultes, qui par la suite continuent de vivre une violence sexuelle, physique et émotionnelle. Alors tout ça dans un seul témoignage. Il faudrait les additionner, ces témoignages-là, par milliers. J'espère que le gouvernement, j'espère que tous les autres gouvernements aussi, car ils nous ont ordonné de faire l'exercice, vont regarder ceci avec une lunette de droit international, de droit canadien et de droit autochtone et de faire le débat à la bonne place avec tous nos experts et avec les Autochtones.
Vous avez mis 231 recommandations, appel à la justice. Concrètement, vous souhaitez que le gouvernement fasse quoi? Donne suite à tout ça? Certaines personnes pourraient dire c'est difficile à imaginer que ça puisse se réaliser. 231.
Rien n'est impossible. Rien n'est impossible. S'il y a une volonté politique, sociale, économique et institutionnelle, et on parle de tout le monde aussi qui nous écoute, c'est faisable. C'est faisable. Si nous, on a traversé 500 ans d'oppression, regardez comment je suis forte devant vous, parce que c'est faisable.
Commissioner Odette, Mike Lucatero with Global National. I know Commissioner Buller didn't want to go there, but you seemingly are quite disappointed that the Prime Minister didn't use the term genocide. Tell me why.
Well, as a human being, as a woman who is living this tragedy, okay, but most of all because we travel across Canada. Remember this, we were ordered to do this inquiry. That's the order in council. We were ordered. Words are important. So we took this very, very seriously. And when we sat down and honored to receive the truth, the voices, messages, were connected in a context, let's say legal context, very easy. Violation here, violence there, and so on. So with the international and all of that, rights that are violated, and here we have the Prime Minister who ordered this. I was hoping that he would have, that courage to put that new chapter that we are all requesting. But it's not over. Pressure. Probably groups, families will remind him.
For my second question, just the Commission. Oh,
Add something to
Sure.
that. We don't need to hear the word genocide come out of the Prime Minister's mouth, because the families have told us, the survivors have told us their truths.
so my follow-up for you then, you've put 231 recommendations, calls for justice to this government. These families have been waiting so long, and they were hoping for some sort, and they will be continuing to hope for some sort of resolution, or at least seeing change. Do you think, or what is your hope for how soon that change can come from a government when you have put such a mountain before them?
There are calls for justice that this government, even in the short term it has, is able to act on, specifically with respect to the gender discrimination in the Indian Act and eliminating that immediately. There are investments they can make in victim services. They can insist the police start changing their policies and protocols. There's work that can be started now.
Bonjour, Mesdames, Monsieur le Commissaire, Catherine Lévesque de la presse canadienne. Je ne suis pas très originale, mais pourquoi ne pas avoir parlé de génocide culturel? Pourquoi être allé une étape plus loin dans votre rapport?
Si je peux me permettre, pas pour sonner sarcastique, je pense que c'est important de prendre le temps de lire l'analyse qui a été faite quand même par des experts en matière de droit international et au niveau de cette convention-là, du génocide, qui va expliquer que on ne parle pas de génocide culturel, on parle d'un génocide qui affecte la culture, la sexualité, la dignité, la sécurité. Peut-être qu'il y avait un choix politique à l'époque où on a entendu au Canada officiellement génocide culturel, mais aujourd'hui, moi j'ai pas honte, c'est ça, c'est tout.
D'accord. Parmi vos recommandations, vous parlez de l'exploitation des ressources naturelles et du fait qu'il faut considérer les effets sur les femmes et les filles autochtones. Oui. Je me demandais, on a Trans Mountain qui s'en vient, qu'est-ce que le gouvernement devrait faire dans un monde idéal avant la première pelletée de terre?
Je vais être sincère avec vous, il y a déjà beaucoup de gens, de leaders autochtones qui vont avoir dit haut et fort comment les choses doivent se faire. Donc, M. Trudeau et tous les gouvernements knows how, savent comment. Pour ce qui est de la sécurité des femmes, ça c'est fondamental que la sécurité sexuelle, la sécurité économique et culturelle des femmes dans les territoires où on va exploiter le territoire, elles ne sont pas considérées, elles ne sont pas protégées et on propose des solutions qui émanent justement des femmes.
Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. My question is actually for Commissioner Buller. I would like to know how concerned are you that the debate over the use of genocide and the appropriateness of using that word will overshadow the rest of your report?
I'm very glad that people are having this conversation about genocide, what it is, what it means, the effects that has on people and has had for generations. And I want to share a little story with you about a family that I heard from in one of our public hearings, because the families started the discussion about genocide through their truths. For this particular family, the grandparents went to residential school and, of course, lost their language, lost their culture, lost many of their relatives. The parents of that family were forced to relocate. Some of the women in the family were sterilized by force, not by choice. Some of the members of the family in the parents' generation also were required, again by force, to go elsewhere, to live elsewhere. Women who married non-status Indian men were forced out of their own communities and any sort of safety net that they might have had. There were also, in that same generation, parents who were scooped and taken away by force.
If I may.
There was intergenerational violence in the family, all stemming from the trauma that the parents and the grandparents felt. So this Indigenous families, Indigenous people have been talking about this for generations. Now the children are in foster care. They're losing their culture, their sense of being. And this is a very common discussion. So it's something that the Indigenous communities have known for generations. And it's only through the families and survivors who spoke out and shared their truths that now all of Canada knows.
And as a follow-up, have you seen the comments of former Minister Bernard Valcourt? What have you thought about it when he said that the use of the word genocide is similar to propaganda? And how widespread do you think such a thinking is in Canadian society?
I was disappointed to read the comments that were attributed to him. And I think it's important for everybody, for all Canadians, to know that we often think of genocide as the Holocaust, of the killings in Africa and elsewhere. And of course, that is genocide. And of course, it is tragedy. But the type of genocide we have in Canada is, as my colleague, Commissioner Robinson, said, death by a million paper cuts for generations.
Thank you. Maura Forrest, National Post. I have a very specific question about the changes to the criminal code, or the recommended changes to the criminal code. One of the recommendations is to review the Gladio principle in cases where there are Indigenous women victims. And I'm wondering what you mean by that, and is the idea that the Gladio principle could be given less weight or discounted in cases where Indigenous women are victims?
I'll answer that. The Gladue principle in the criminal code was developed to address the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples within the criminal justice system. Where we are saying it needs examination is in how that translates into safety and protection. There are many families that shared with us, as well as experts, that the way the Gladue principle is being applied, and it's not that the principle is wrong, it's how it's being applied, is actually resulting in violence against Indigenous women in some circumstances, receiving lesser sentences. So I'll use the language families used. You get out of jail free. You get a slap on the wrist. The severity of the violence, the reality and the experiences of the Indigenous woman in these cases of violence isn't part of the equation. So we have to look at Gladue in a holistic perspective and see how it is effective in decreasing overrepresentation, effective in reducing recidivism, and effective in creating safety and security. It can't just be a principle without any substance or its effectiveness being understood and achieved.
Okay, and as a follow-up, one of the other recommendations is to include the existence of Indigenous women victims as an aggravating factor in sentencing. And you mentioned passing Bill S-215, which would do that, but that bill has already been defeated in the House of Commons, and so I wonder, do you not think the government has already made its position on that clear?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear, I don't know if you heard her, but there was zippers going.
Oh,
Could you
sorry.
repeat your question?
Yeah. You mentioned wanting the existence of Indigenous women victims to be an aggravating factor in sentencing, and that the government should pass a recent Senate bill, S-215, that would do that. But that bill has been defeated in the House of Commons, and I wonder if you think the government has already made its position clear on that proposal.
Hopefully they'll read the report and reconsider. What needs to happen in this case, because we've also heard that in this country there is no recourse. Violence against Indigenous women can happen with impunity for various reasons. The recent case before the Supreme Court is an example of that, how Indigenous women are dehumanized by the criminal justice system. By making this an aggravating factor, you're requiring the judges to put this in their minds when they are deciding on sentencing. Further, it's a message to the Canadian public that violence against Indigenous women, because so pervasive, needs to be denounced.
Bonjour, Mélanie Marquis de la presse. Madame Odette, la question est pour vous. Juste pour que ce soit clair, demandez-vous au gouvernement de reconnaître formellement qu'il y a eu un génocide au Canada et quelle serait la signification d'un refus du gouvernement, quel qu'il soit, qui soit au pouvoir, là, de le faire, de le reconnaître?
Pour répondre avec la fin du refus, ça c'est si on refusait aujourd'hui?
Aujourd'hui ou demain ou la semaine prochaine.
OK. Écoutez, moi, je pense que, comme Mme Buzetti, je pense qu'elle a parlé de faire de l'ombrage avec ce mot. Je vous dirais non. Quel courage que les femmes ont eu, encore une fois, pour ébranler un pays. La tornade, hier, les a pas empêchées d'être ici. Donc, avec la force, au niveau des gouvernements, de ne pas vouloir reconnaître, on s'y attendait, ça. Et on va s'y attendre longtemps, parce que ça fait des siècles qu'on dénonce et que ça ne change pas. Mais de plus en plus, avec le rapport de la Commission sur les femmes assassinées et disparues, on vient de donner un outil, on vient de élever le discours juridique, socialement et avec beaucoup de preuves qui démontrent qu'au Canada, les choses ne marchent pas bien pour protéger les femmes autochtones.
Vous avez poussé pour que le Québec fasse l'objet d'un rapport séparé.
Oui.
J'aimerais vous demander laquelle des recommandations vous jugez la plus importante et juste me préciser un peu aussi quelle forme vous voudriez voir l'enquête publique sur les enfants autochtones disparus prendre. Connaissez-vous l'ampleur du phénomène?
Il y a ce phénomène avec beaucoup de médias ou de gens, quelles sont les priorités au niveau des recommandations? Elles sont toutes importantes. Il y avait 10 000 projets de recommandations donnés par les femmes pendant cet exercice démocratique. Donc, ce qu'on vous propose, ce sont nos priorités comme commissaire. Pour ce qui est de la commission au Québec, je pense que les familles qui sont venues témoigner, une vingtaine de familles qui nous ont expliqué la perte d'un être cher sans avoir de réponse, je ne suis pas sûre qu'on accepterait ça aujourd'hui en 2019, que mon enfant tombe malade, puis on ne me laisse pas me dire de quoi il est mort, où est-il enterré et depuis quand. Il y aurait un scandale. Alors pourquoi nous, il faut qu'on tolère ces choses-là? C'est ce qu'on entend de la part des familles.
Dylan Robertson with the Winnipeg Free Press. I had a question about subpoenas, because I noticed in the report you only issued these subpoenas in late 2018. It's pretty extraordinary to have the power to actually get subpoenas. I'm just wondering how you justify that timeline. Very few came back. I understand it was a tight turnaround. There's dozens of families that might be wondering, you know, did the commissioners actually look at the case of my missing child, my deceased relative? How do you justify doing these subpoenas so late in the game?
What was the last phrase? How do we justify?
Yeah, I think looking at our total timeline, the timing of issuing the subpoenas was not late, because don't forget, we couldn't have a basis for issuing the subpoenas until we started to hear from families and survivors. So in the total picture, it's not late for issuing them.
If I may add, Chief Commissioner, so everybody understand the same thing. It appeared late, but we did ask as soon we started, as soon we have all the team in place, 2016 and 17. But the technology was not ready, and we were. So we had thousands of document cases that we couldn't access yet. So we were ready. Let's make this clear about the subpoena.
What happens with these outstanding subpoenas? Are they dead now that the inquiry terms are finished? Does this go anywhere? Have you had any assurance that these police forces will do something with these?
Well, at the end of June, when our mandate ends, we cease to exist as a legal entity. So there would be no person or office to send the information to. But I can say that generally speaking, our subpoenas have been followed, and I think if my memory serves me correctly, we had many police files turned over to us, some even without subpoenas. So I think you have to look at the larger picture, that the constraints that we had for time as well. But we did receive files. We have looked at them. And I believe the only two files that were still in dispute about whether they would be turned over to us or not were subject to a federal court action.
Hi, Kathleen Martins from APTN. You did say you don't have to hear the Prime Minister say the word genocide, but some would say you would need his commitment and his budget to put your action plan into effect. How important is it that he be reelected?
Ask the Prime Minister.
Well, you know, if I can add to that, as you say, your mandate ends at the end of this month. Some people might say the interest in the findings could end at that time as well. So how do you keep the momentum going? Do you anticipate it being part of the election campaign?
Could you repeat? I don't hear well, to be honest.
I'm just thinking about the cycle of the report coming out now, your findings coming out now, and it's budding right up to an election campaign. So how important is, how are you going to keep this in the public eye?
Well, this inquiry is very special because we weren't normal, traditional commissioners. We don't speak, we don't do press at all. What we did, as soon we were able to with the team, go out there in the communities or travel, educate, inform, and making sure that citizens, people, members, families that we were able to meet during that portage, to make sure that they make all level of government accountable. I wasn't afraid to say, let's not forget, there is election. So there is a momentum for everyone across Canada to remind what was asked and ordered. And also, when September is coming, with maybe, who knows, which government are the same, it doesn't stop the movement. Because of the movement, there's an inquiry. Now the inquiry is finishing, the movement has that legal tool that was missing probably.
If I may add to that, the calls for justice, as Chief Commissioner Buller has articulated quite clearly, they're legal imperatives. So regardless of what government's in power, based on the laws they've enacted or their predecessors and their international treaties that Canada, in many of its iterations, has signed on to, they're all bound by it. So my hope is that each political party vying to hold that seat is going to make this an issue and will demonstrate to all Canadians what their commitment is, what their plans are. And then it's up to Canadians to ask those questions of them. What are you going to do, Mr. Scheer? What are you going to do, Miss May? What are you going to do, Mr. Trudeau? And then we'll all decide who's in the best place to make it happen.
Good day. My name is Philip Edwards. I'm on assignment for the Thunder Bay Net News Ledger. I'm also the former Thunder Bay Police Services governor in the early 90s, who, after several years of research on Native family violence and racism in education, advocated for an inquiry 25 years ago plus. I congratulate you on your hard work. I do have some intimate familiarity with the issues in many ways. My question is, had the requested 2-year extension been approved, what more could have been accomplished? I'm not sure who can answer that question.
Of course we can.
Sure, we all could.
We could. That's the problem. Can I give you an example? It's like an iceberg. In the time that we had, we were able to chip away at the part of the iceberg that's above the water line. But there's an awful lot of the iceberg that's below the water line, that's untouched by us.
Okay, thank you. The follow-up question is, how much of our collective recovery, I'm an Anishinaabe person, requires addressing lateral violence and owning solutions, and how much of it may be attributed to racism and genocide as a product of ethnically maligned power? In fact, I would say that Erogenal, I use the word European Aboriginal, coming from Europe, are Erogenal males more likely to be homicidal maniacs in these cases, or is it a feature of our society, which it certainly does appear to be, or is it more attributed to family violence or lateral violence, as the term is used? I would go beyond genocide. I would say that there's something else going on in society, and we are simply part of that a dismissed sort of feature of our predatory vulnerability?
I'm not sure we understand your question. Could you maybe rephrase it? And there's also feedback, so speak up a little bit because we've had a bit of a hard time hearing some questions.
Well, I would say there are two sides to the problem. Having been a social scientist and researcher myself in the past, I would say there are two sides to the problem. One side is what can we own as Anishinaabe people and find solutions for ourselves. The other side of the problem is that I would characterize the so-called institutional racism as really a product of ethnically maligned power. At that same time, Anishinaabe people, women, are more predatorially vulnerable to those people who crave power, violence, authority.
I understand.
Okay.
I think I do.
Yeah.
From an Innu woman perspective, what Anishinaabe people could do or have to do, maybe if I understand, let's go back of what was the role of the Anishinaabe women? What was the role of the Indigenous women across Canada? We call Canada. We had a role. It was taken away. And our man needs to protect us. Our man, our son, and grandfathers needs to make sure that within that protection, they also gave us the space we used to have. We could speak, we could feed and protect also, but we lost that. We lost. But beautiful example across Canada where leadership makes sure that they put in place program services or things that are saving our women that we don't know enough. And in this report, there is a beautiful chapter about that.
I'm sorry, it doesn't address the issue of genocide and what I call white supremacy.
We'll proceed.
You're in
to the next
control
mic.
here, right?
Thank you.
And that seems to be the problem.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, it came from my heart.
Hi, my name is Chantal Belrichard, and I am a reporter with the Indigenous unit at CBC based on the West Coast. This question is for you, Chief Commissioner. One of the things I was summarizing as you were making your statements around your calls to all Canadians were read the report, speak out against sexism, violenceism, racism, hold governments to account, and decolonize yourself, to which I received a flurry of reactions, some probably who were trolling me, but others who I think sincerely wanted to know what that means. You know, you're all very intelligent people who have been steeped in this report, and I think for a lot of everyday Canadians, to be told to decolonize yourself is maybe a bit confusing. If you just might elaborate on that a bit.
C'est bon. Certainly, to decolonize yourself means having starting with an open mind, learning about the real history of Canada. Our report is a good place to start to find out really what the lives of Indigenous women and girls have been like for generations. To us LGBTQIA people have had challenges layered on top of challenges. So the first step is to have an open mind. The next step is to learn and educate ourselves and each other. The next step then is to understanding the issues, to speak out against racism, sexism, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia. You know, back in the 60s, and I'm aging myself here, we used to say, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So if you're not speaking out against sexism, violence, racism, then you're part of the problem. And I think, too, it's important to reach out to people, to understand, to participate in all activities, in all communities. Powwows aren't just for Indigenous people. Everyone's welcome. Come on down.
And my follow-up question is, as we move forward with the 231 calls for justice you've put before Canada, I think we're going to be, as media, dissecting a lot of that and talking about it. And one of the things I've been asked about already several times is the comparison with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, and whether these are recommendations, and I've heard people here discuss them as legal imperatives, and forgive me for not being that smart in that legal context. If you could just elaborate on what the difference is between a recommendation and what you were calling a legal imperative.
I'm sorry, sometimes it's really hard to put the lawyer in me aside. But the calls to justice, they're rooted in our understanding of laws and rights. So if we're talking about access to health, for example, the calls for justice that there be holistic wraparound health services in all communities and isolated communities, that isn't just a suggestion, it's because the people in those communities have a right to health, have a right to those services. So then it becomes a non-negotiable. We have international and domestic laws that say that the government has to ensure that these are provided, that the rights are not only acknowledged, respected, but protected, and actively uphold that. So that's, sorry again for the lingo, but that's what it means. It's like you legally have to do it. It's not like we're asking you to come up with a new framework to understand what you have to do. You signed it already. You're just not implementing it.
Thank you for clarifying.
To make it my language to your language, Canada, it seemed like those rights are respected in the South. But when you live in my north, her north, far, far away, there's no protection, no services, no accessibility, and it's still called Canada.
Thank you.
So, nous reste 3 questions. So the people standing at the mic can ask questions, then we'll end the session. Thank you. Go ahead.
Zian Lim, HuffPost Canada. So one of the calls for action suggests amending the Constitution to bring it into conformity with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which implies that there's a conflict between the Declaration and aspects of the Constitution. So the report also calls for the immediate passage of Bill C-262, which is Romeo Saganash's private member's bill, calling on the government to ensure that Canada's laws are in harmony with UNDRIP. But there's nothing in the current text of Mr. Saganash's bill that proposes amending the Constitution. So I was wondering, why did you include amending the Constitution to bring it into conformity with UNDRIP into the report? And do you think this call for justice to amend the Constitution to bring it in line with UNDRIP will undermine efforts to pass Bill 262 before Parliament adjourns?
That's a law school exam question, thank you. The bill, we support it, however, it's federal legislation that could be overturned by another government, in theory. So having it enshrined in the Constitution, we think, is a very important step, so that its repeal or it being struck down or changed in the future will be harder. So that is why it has to become not just a piece of federal legislation, but something embedded in the foundation of our constitutional democracy. And that's why having UNDRIP in the Constitution and bringing the Constitution in conformity with UNDRIP is something that is fundamental.
And I have a follow-up.
Until First Nation have their own constitution?
Okay, my follow-up question is, do you think the inclusion of that in the report to amend the Constitution will fuel, I guess, arguments against 262?
The Constitution, which is more than one document, of course, is supposed to say what we stand for as a nation, what we believe in, and the country we aspire to be. So I think all Canadians aspire to be fair, generous, kind, tolerant people. And that should be enshrined in our Constitution using the principles in UNDRA. And nothing less.
Kwekwe, Tanya Picard, Inno de Pessamit, journaliste Société Communication Atikamekw-Montagnais. Ma question, c'est plusieurs membres de nos communautés ont déploré le nombre limité d'audiences. Beaucoup auraient préféré témoigner, mais ne pouvaient pas se déplacer. Le délai a-t-il nui à cette enquête?
Oui, carrément. Dans la demande de prolongation des 24 mois qui étaient sollicités et demandés, dans le plan d'action, il y avait en effet beaucoup plus de territoires, notamment au Québec et à travers le Canada, pour s'assurer qu'on puisse aller écouter les femmes, les familles et les survivantes. Évidemment, avec cette prolongation-là, c'était aussi de s'assurer d'aller vers elles si elles ne pouvaient pas venir vers nous.
Qu'est-ce que vous êtes prêt à faire pour pas que ce rapport soit un rapport comme parmi tant d'autres, comme l'a été la Commission royale des peuples autochtones qui a été mis en tablette, sur les tablettes du gouvernement en 1996?
Alors, les commissaires, leur mandat commence en 2016 et se termine en 2019. Les commissaires vous ont proposé, avec les recommandations, que moi j'appelle un appel à la justice, que nous appelons, pardon, des solutions, des choses qu'on doit faire. La question, je la reprends et je la partage au reste du Canada, surtout au gouvernement qui nous ont ordonné de faire cet exercice démocratique. Alors j'espère, avec la SOCAM, que vous allez honorer cette vérité-là en éduquant et en informant. The good question was, what are we going to do? It's what you going to do and what we going to do. Educate, making sure that it stays alive and implemented.
Donc, ce rapport n'est pas une fin, mais ce n'est que le début.
Que c'est bien dit.
Merci.
La dernière question, last question.
Oui, Fanny Lévesque de la presse. Je voulais savoir, vous avez entendu recueillir beaucoup de vérités, souvent très difficiles également. Qu'est-ce que vous souhaitez ou qui soit mis en place pour donner des réponses à des familles qui souhaiteraient en avoir? Je crois qu'il y avait une recommandation, entre autres, d'ordonner le gouvernement du Québec de fournir les documents. Est-ce que vous pourriez nous expliquer un petit peu plus qu'est-ce que ça pourrait, comment ça pourrait prendre forme, ce...
Ben, it's for all of us, Fanny, ou il faudrait que tu traduises?
Pouvez-vous juste répéter une autre fois?
Ben, peut-être pour Madame Odette, dans ce cas-là, en français. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez...
Porte-parole.
Bon. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez que je répète la question?
Pour que les commissaires comprennent votre question.
OK. Qu'est-ce que vous avez entendu beaucoup de vérités, souvent des cas irrésolus, mais aussi quand il était question de cas de disparition d'enfants, pas nécessairement des assassinats, qu'est-ce que vous aimeriez laisser, ou pas laisser, mais quel mécanisme devrait être en place pour donner des réponses à ces familles?
I was hoping you would translate for my colleagues.
Okay. Well, I think the question is that what effects for recommendations would you make for the police, for families to know?
I just want to know if you're going to give answers to some families that told you their stories. And I learned in the Quebec report that you were asking the government to give answers. So how will it work?
You want to add something at the national level, and then I can conclude with Quebec? Merci.
In our interim report, we recommended to the government that there be an independent forensic review police task force. The government, and the purpose of that task force would be to give families and survivors the answers that they want. The government declined, at least so far, to form that task force. We have been able, through subpoenas and other methods of persuasion, been able to find some documents and some police files for families, and we've shared those where we can. The family information liaison units across Canada have also been able to obtain documents for families and survivors. So there has been some information flow as a result of this work. But really, we're back at our interim report and that recommendation for the task force, not only to provide information, but to reinvestigate.
OK. J'ai cru que vous aviez quitté le micro. Du côté du rapport Québec, qui est clair dans ses recommandations, on le dit dans ses appels à la justice, c'est comme ça, maintenant je me trompe, désolée, et aussi dans l'explication au fait que les familles viennent témoigner et se retrouvent sans réponse. Il est important, et nous avons cette responsabilité-là, et surtout les institutions qui détiennent de l'information, de trouver la façon de remettre. Les mécanismes vont sûrement varier d'une province à l'autre, étant donné que c'est 14 enquêtes en même temps. Rappelons-nous, cette enquête nationale. Et pour le Québec, pour répondre à votre question, il y a des pourparlers à savoir comment les choses doivent se faire. Et une des grandes préoccupations de l'enquête nationale, c'est de s'assurer que lorsque les familles pourraient recevoir des informations, qu'il y ait un filet de sécurité autour d'elles, des gens pour les soutenir. Alors ça, dans les négociations, les pourparlers, les échanges, c'est en cours. Et on va le faire pour s'assurer que ça se fasse avant le 30 juin.
Donc, c'est des échanges avec le gouvernement du Québec?
Je vais arrêter là. Okay. Merci.
Excellent. Alors, thank you very much. That ends our session.